Well, Shafi, I suggest that after such inspiring discussion, we are all in shape for the next stage of this live broadcast, where we shall be inviting some other phenomenal speakers. And let me introduce the first one, Dr. Sangeeta Reddy. She's a Joint Managing Director, Apollo Hospitals Enterprises, and a President of FICCI, the Federation of the Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. We have been, as WebEd, doing business in India, and knowing the impact of FICCI, I would say that Dr. Reddy, if not the most, one of the most impactful and important women in India. She's also global healthcare influencer, healthcare technocrat, and social entrepreneur and humanitarian. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Reddy.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Plamen. So I think our next speaker on the panel, we can't see quite Claudio. I think you're there, Claudio? Yes, there we are.
Yes,
Professor Claudio Lottenberg. Thank you for joining us all the way from Brazil. I was in Sao Paulo last year giving a talk, and I came across the Albert Einstein Hospital, which is an amazing scientific clinical hospital. And Claudio is essentially an ophthalmologist by background, but now he chairs and presidents the Albert Einstein Institute and Healthcare System, and chairman of United Healthcare Group. So it's a pleasure to have you here from Brazil. Thank you, Professor Lottenberg.
Thank you for being with us,
Thank
Professor
you very
Lottenberg.
much.
And I would like to present the third participant in the panel, Dr. Christoph Boone. He's Vice President, Global Medical Epidemiology and Big Data Analysis at Pfizer. And he's recognized as the 2019 Top 100 Innovator in Data and Analytics.
I think that with the expansion of digital technologies, I think with the expansion of many of our advanced digital technologies, we can certainly get faster. We can actually develop a more rapid response to isolate, to contact trace, and essentially quarantine many of the areas that are affected by these particular outbreaks.
Thank you so much for that. And as time goes on, hopefully we'll have enough capacity on a global level to do the testing that's required to be able to manage this pandemic over the next year to even 2 months, which it may last for. Dr. Reddy, India has a huge population of 1.4 billion, I think it is. As director of the Apollo Hospitals Group, can you share experience of how you're managing a pandemic in a large population that's sometimes quite congested and concentrated in parts of the country? What have your experiences been? Tell me.
So, Dr. Ahmed, first, thank you for having me here. And I think it's at times like this when people from all over the world just want to get together and share experiences and see how they can help others do better. So it is indeed a pleasure to be here, and I come with hope as well. So to begin with, I think I need to quickly give some background. So Apollo Hospitals is one of India's largest healthcare groups, and besides having about 10,000 beds distributed in over 50 locations, which is in 17 cities, we also have 3,600 pharmacies, etc. We have clinics as well. And in India, the private healthcare typically does about 70% of the high-end tertiary care work, but about 30 to 40% of the outpatient work. If you don't count, the GP network, and then if you take that, then it moves up again to about over 50%. Apollo created an integrated approach strategy to the crisis because we wanted to first take care and serve our customers. So our first one was that we created on the back of our existing healthcare app, we put an AI-enabled risk score for COVID. And we've had, over 11.5 million downloads of that app or people doing the risk scoring. So this helped people get a sense of understanding, and it parallelly educated them on what were the symptoms, what were they looking at, what was the risk. From then on, we also had fever clinics. We worked with the government to start testing in the private sector. We had facilities for treatment, and then also tied up with hotel chains to create isolation rooms. So today we offer about 650 high-end treatment beds, including ICUs, but we also have 5,000 isolation beds. And we can help upgrade our hospital response to over 1,000 beds. So besides this, I think education was very important. We worked with the government and an online training company to create a ventilator training program. Wow. We worked with companies who were building ventilators to give them specifications, to have our anesthetists involved in training them or helping them understand. We worked with fabric garment manufacturers to help them create PPEs and understand what is a PPE and what's the importance of interlocking seams and waterproof fabric and the whole thing. So in every way that we could, we just jumped in there and said, let's find a way to make this. This is not just a healthcare professional's response. This is a country response. Yeah. So education, awareness, the whole community. And I have to say that I think our Prime Minister and our government has done an amazing job. And India declared its lockdown when the country had just 100 positive cases. So it was a very early response to lockdown. We started screening individuals coming into the country within, January 17th. So that was, just 2 weeks after the cases had been, really declared. And so India's had a very proactive, integrated, calibrated response. And I think that we're doing pretty well. With over 12,000 cases, with our death rate, sad but fairly controlled at about 450 cases. And we're now seeing that about a week ago, we saw that we were doubling our numbers every 3 to 4 days. Now we're doubling every 5 days. So I think that the lockdown has helped us to flatten the curve.
Wonderful. That's so good to hear. And we've heard so much about the way you've managed this through technology, through social engagement, through educational tools at pace, which is what we kind of are hoping for many societies to push on. So thanks for that, Dr. Reddy. It's great to hear that how India has faced up to that challenge. Professor Lottenberg from Brazil. Look, obviously, again, it's a very large population, very big country, very widespread communities. Can you just give me an idea from your experiences of how Brazil is managing their problem, and perhaps compare that with India's, for example? It'd be great to hear your experiences, Professor Lottenberg.
Well, first of all, I would like to say that I'm deeply honored to be with people like you and trying to explain some of the movements that we have in our country. We are in a war. And the big difference is that there is no side in this war. All of us, we are together. Our system here is a universal system, as you know, and the challenge is very big since we have the responsibility of deliver services to more than 230 million people at the same time. Almost 47 million people of these people are related to a private system that runs together. What means that we have to reinforce our efforts to make both sides to work together. In the moment that the private sector is not working, it may represent that the government is going to have to supplement even more resources with few money for those that at this moment they can also afford. What I can tell you is that till now, just 27% of the people that have disease, they are under 60 years old. And in this sample, 27% without any risk factors. In Brazil, we had 13,500 cases. We have 1,800 that were diseased. And we have problems because I'm not so sure that we have all the notifications that we could have. We have started to work here in our hospital much before all the situation has become more problematic. And even our Ministry of Health Affairs has made it at best efforts also to start before. We have a lockdown in big cities. Now people, they are reacting because they could not understand that they cannot work. The economic activities in the country, we are losing a lot of money. We are losing a lot of opportunities. So we have at this moment to start to study how to return to normal. The best hospitals, they are not crowded. Its occupancy rate is very low. We don't have so many cases, but I'm talking about some specific areas in the country. And I used to say that inside of Brazil, we have some Brazils, what means that different realities, different levels of access, we do not have the same equity to the whole country in all areas of the country. We understand that the same movement that all over the world people are trying to do in a way to make the curve lower, in a way to give access to intensive care unit, this is the mentality that we have now. But at the moment, what I understand that we should be doing, I'm not saying that we are going to be doing, I'm not the Ministry of Health Affairs, but what people should be doing would be to have more data, to work more granular way. I used to say that we live at the age of the media and we still work as if we were at the middle age. So people can have to be treated according to its own necessities. The reality is we have to work according to what's going to be useful to each one of the places of the country. And I understand in the moment that we're going to be able to have more tests, the moment that we're going to be able to understand the reality of each place in the country, we are going to be able to finish part of the lockdown. I think that we have some vertical opportunities. We know what are the risk groups. And I do believe that we have to find an alternative. Otherwise, people in our country, they are not going to die because of the coronavirus, but they're going to have to die. They're going to die because of the social movement that is going to be a consequence. We have to understand that besides any kind of studies that we have, saying that we have to preserve people at home, and I understand, I am a doctor, I want to keep and save lives, but we have some other consequences that we are not going to be able to measure right now. So I think that our main challenge as leaders all over the world is to find ways not only to resolve the problem right now, but how we can implement something in a way to return to the normal life. Yesterday I had the opportunity to talk with people in Weizmann Institute. They have a different observation about how to make lockdown in a way to establish period of time that people are working, people that stay at home. You change into different groups in terms to enjoy the transmission period of the cases to each one. So we have arsenal, we have data, we have to work in a way to change this to make it more customized. We are studying hydroxychloroquine. Till now, not have anything that be conclusive about this. We still need more 2 weeks. The good observation about chloroquine is that we do not have side effects if you're going to feel according to what is recommended by the Brazilian FDA. These are my general observations regarding Brazil.
Thank you so much for sharing such a wide range of issues that you're facing. And we understand that there's a balance between where we are in terms of lockdown and saving lives, the economy coming back and bouncing back and opening up after lockdown. And there's discussion ongoing in every country around the world about what that could look like in the next few months. And indeed, how long the lockdown might last for over a year, 18 months. And it's great to hear your views, as Brazil is slightly different, like Sweden, compared to other countries in their kind of approach to the lockdown process, where we're more about a balance of economy versus the kind of healthcare systems. Thank you for that. Dr. Boone, if I come back to you, I mean, Professor Lottenberg mentioned just very briefly, we can go further on about the issues around hydroxychloroquine, which has been obviously pushed hard from the American government and also from Brazil and other places. In fact, India has sent all their suppliers to Brazil, it seems, at the moment. So you're all involved in this process. But actually, when we talked about hope earlier from Senator Loffredi, is there any hope for us in terms of, are there any therapies coming out that you or Pfizer and other pharma companies can highlight for us that we can look forward to treating the illness? Can you share anything with us?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for the question, but I do want to just chime in on the comments that were just made by the last panelists. I think that they were exactly spot on. generally, I think we all recognize that we're at a war, and there's no country, no population, no industry that's spared in this particular war. So it does take a tremendous amount of international cooperation, not just from the biomedical research community, but broadly, in order to address this, to fight this war and address this particular pandemic. The thing that I'm, as we talk about this idea of realism versus optimism, which is what you led with, the reality is this. I mean, that we're at least a year away from having a usable vaccine that would actually address this particular pandemic. Yeah. And so, which means that we'll continue with these testing and isolation and monitoring and contact tracing and many of these activities because they're necessary at this point. And that's just being real. But the encouraging news that I find is that there's been a tremendous amount of coordination amongst, many of your big pharmaceutical companies, as well as your public agencies and universities and research organizations in order to, what we hope, not necessarily duplicate much of the clinical research efforts. So you're seeing a tremendous amount of information and idea sharing that I think creates a community that would be necessary to identify a potential vaccine for this. One of the more amazing things is that right now, as we speak, there's well over 500 human clinical trials taking place. I think the downside obviously would be is that there's not a tremendous amount of coordination amongst those particular tests and studies. But I'm hopeful that those things will be there. Now, in light of the fact that you mentioned, for example, the hydroxychloroquine, we're seeing tremendous activity there. I know that the National Institutes of Health here in the U.S. has announced a clinical trial along with Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee, here in the U.S. to really determine the safety and efficacy of this particular drug. And for those of you who are not as familiar with this particular therapy, it's been commonly used to treat malaria and rheumatoid arthritis. So, I mean, that's generally what it's been used for in the past. But there's, for some folks, there was actually a poll that was taken in the U.S. recently where, the American public was asked about their feelings towards the use of hydroxychloroquine. And honestly, majority felt that it was a favorable alternative, although, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily using it right now. But from a Pfizer perspective, I think that if you look at this, the development of a drug, Pfizer itself has committed itself to a number of consortia that is actively looking to develop a therapy. We formed partnerships directly with many of the, with other pharmas and biotechs that are particularly interested in this. But not only are we doing that, but we're also providing a pretty significant amount of resources to accelerate many of the discovery and development efforts that are happening. So, I mean, all in all, I'll say that to say that that I'm truly optimistic about the future, about the possibilities of developing a vaccine in short order, but more importantly, building out an infrastructure that would allow us to develop therapies for these types of pandemics, future pandemics, much faster than we had this time around.
Yeah, thanks for that. And it's important to think about the future. The vaccines are about at least a year away, if not 18 months. So we've got to think about how we manage it in the meantime, because vaccines are the cure and will eradicate the illness for us. It's great to see how this will help us in the future. But obviously, we need about therapies today, and you mentioned the drugs that may not be of benefit at the moment. If we move on to the next question, I'd like to ask both Professor Lottenberg and Dr. Reddy about this one. So look, India and Brazil are similar in certain areas. They have the favelas in Brazil. You've got the slums in India with large populations in congested zones. I was on a conversation with a reporter from South Africa finding out how they're managing the townships. What they were doing there, they were actually conversing with the gang leaders and the drug lords to use them to communicate with their people in those areas to manage and communicate social distancing, social isolation, etc. Can you give experiences of yours, Dr. Reddy, in India? What's happening in those congested areas? So we can learn from that.
So I think the congested areas were clearly an area of concern, not just because of the close proximity, but the importance of communicating with them. And I think on the communication front, India has actually done a very good job. So, our teledensity is very high, and, every adult Indian has a phone. Every phone that you receive from someone, you have a pre-recorded message about social distancing, about the importance of the virus, about wearing a mask. So the phone has been very effectively used. The government's app, which is, just launched less than 14 days ago, currently already has 50 million downloads. And so people are understanding the importance of the app. They're also doing hot area zoning. And like I told you earlier, one of the responses that Apollo did was to convert hotel rooms into isolation rooms using a telemedicine cover.
Yeah.
Well, the government has done an amazing job in creating isolation areas. So suspect patients, so train compartments, 300,000 isolation beds have been created in trains. Large hostels of students have been converted. So we have over 500,000 isolation areas, and many of them, even the private sector is coming in and helping with the telemedicine monitoring of that. So I think one of the problems which has been reported in India was really the movement of the migrant labor. But even that, I want to say that I believe that the government and the community have come together because we all believe that this is the war of our generation, and we must fight and we must win and we must do it together. And so I'm, kind of very proud that in our country, I can quite happily say that I don't think a single person has starved or been left or gone to bed hungry during this period of lockdown, because every community has opened up their homes or their kitchens to say, let us help these people. So whether it's relief aid going into the slums or people going out and feeding people who are stranded from their homes, we're not only following the lockdown, the social distancing, but also finding ways to make sure that the community is supported. And I think across the country, everyone is following the diktat of being very careful about protecting the elderly. So I think a combination of the government, civic society, the media, and of course the true heroes of this environment, which are the doctors and nurses and healthcare workers and truck drivers and everybody who's handling essential supplies and even the cleaning staff, all of them are the true heroes. But everyone coming together is enabling us to effectively handle this pandemic.
Thank you. Do you have any issues with PPE like we have in the UK? Reassure me that India also has issues with PPE for the healthcare workers.
So honestly, I think we all had a great fear that we would not have enough PPEs. And the lockdown helped us gain some of that breathing time. So beds were created, isolation beds were created. And like I said earlier, textile factories have been converted now into PPE manufacturing and production. So I won't say, we're 100% because I don't know or don't think India's reached the peak, but we do have PPEs for now. And I hope very soon we'll be able to offer the world PPEs made in India.
Thank you. Last question before I leave and go to the Q&A. Professor Lottenberg, what's your experience around the favelas and the kind of the large population that you have, and how are you managing that disparate population?
Listen, we do not have just a problem that is related to healthcare. We have a social problem, but it's something that is not new in our environment. The point is that this moment has an important turnaround that make us to recognize that the situation in the country has to change for now and for the future. In my professional life as a citizen, I have never seen such a union that we are observing right now in terms to confront in different conditions what we used to do compared to what we are doing. What our partner just said about telemedicine, people finally, they decided that telemedicine can be an important tool. We had problems because telemedicine hasn't been regulated till now in our country. But now, because of this movement, by exception, people, they understand that telemedicine is an important resource that to have to bring definitely to be adopted as part of our practice. More than that, rich people, the private sector, they are concerned about the social problems. And we can see some field hospitals like the army used to build that have been built by the private sector for those that cannot afford. So at this moment, I think that it's going to happen an important reaction that is going to finish with some myths. For us that work on healthcare, we usually used to understand that when we talk about healthcare, we have to discuss about big hospitals, high technology, and it's a pity because we know that a good structure of primary care with coordination is going to be able to resolve more than 90% of the cases, that you do not have to be in contact permanently with a doctor to have some support. So this is a different reaction that is happening right now. And I understand that at this time, it came to stay.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Plamen, back to you. And thank you.
Thank you. Such a wonderful panel. I'm afraid we're way beyond time, but sometimes it's difficult to stop such a thoughtful discussion. I have one request for Ms. Salonga. If it's possible to wrap up these questions all together and hopefully send them to our panelists, because we are way beyond the time where we should have been already over. Send them to the panelists, and hopefully having Dr. Reddy, Professor Lottenberg, and Dr. Boone promise that you would be in a position to answer the questions from Bianca and from the people who are watching this show. And we will publish them and we will distribute them also to our ecosystem. Again, a big thank you to all of you for joining and spending your time with the Webbit Global community, and looking forward to have you with us and to further discuss and build value together. Thank you one more time. Shafi, just last words. We are moving to our next stage where we have some fantastic startups joining us, and they shall be pitching their great ideas. They shall be providing hopes and values, and hopefully the investors shall be exploring opportunities and even investing in such. So what is your overall wrap up? Maybe just a few seconds, Shafi, your feeling from this panel.
So I'm leaving this panel with a sense of hope from our senator, who mentioned the kind of strategies that government going forward after COVID, the great work that they're doing, of course, in various parts of the globe. Last week, we talked about the medical therapies, the front line, the kind of the war against COVID. Now we're looking at how we manage this pandemic going forward. So I'm seeing a mature conversation taking place and great learning from various parts of the world. And it's about communities coming together and supporting the healthcare systems and also each individual around the world. So I'm leaving with a sense of hope. Hope you are from this conversation, from these global leaders that have shared their time with us today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Please stay with us. After the break, we are coming back with 3 startups, pitching everyone 3 minutes, 4 investors, and me, 5 of us, vetting them and selecting one winner who will join the Global Founders Games Challenge for $1 million and will receive a free exhibition stand at Webbit and tickets to the festival. Stay with us.